Silence fell over the Michelin-starred dining room the moment the whispered insult left the socialite's lips. "She can't even read the menu." The waitress didn't flinch. Instead, her flawless Parisian rebuttal made the city's most feared syndicate leader drop his fork and question everything he knew about power. Soft jazz floated through the dimly lit expanse of l'Orangerie, Chicago's most exclusive French dining establishment. Beneath the warm glow of crystal chandeliers, the city's elite gathered to trade secrets over plates of duck confit and bottles of ridiculously overpriced Burgundy. In the center booth, effectively holding court, sat Lorenzo Falcone. Lorenzo was a man whose reputation preceded him in every room he entered. To the public, he was a venture capitalist, a pillar of the River North real estate boom. To the federal government and the criminal underworld, he was the ruthless architect of the Falcone Syndicate, a man who controlled the city's ports with an iron fist. Tonight, however, his primary adversary was boredom. Sitting across from him was Beatrice Sterling, the daughter of a prominent state senator. The dinner was purely transactional, a necessary chore to secure her father's cooperation on a zoning permit. Beatrice, unfortunately, had interpreted the invitation as a genuine romantic overture. Draped in diamonds and reeking of Chanel, she spent the first 45 minutes of the evening talking incessantly about herself, her country club, and her profound disdain for the city's working class. Lorenzo nodded politely, his dark eyes hollow, silently calculating how many minutes he had to endure before he could reasonably ask for the check. Approaching their table was a waitress named Chloe Sinclair. According to the brass name tag pinned to her crisp, white apron, she was just another face in the service industry. She had unassuming brown hair pulled into a neat chignon, sharp hazel eyes, and a posture that was perfectly subservient. Yet, there was a quiet grace in the way she navigated the dining room, a silent efficiency that Lorenzo's predatory instincts had unconsciously tracked since they sat down. "Good evening," Chloe said, her voice a soft, Midwestern murmur. "Are we ready to order? Or would you like another moment with the wine list?" Beatrice sighed dramatically, dropping the heavy leather-bound menu onto the table with a loud thud. "Honestly, I don't know why they make these so complicated. Half of this is just gibberish." She pointed a manicured finger at a specific line. "I'll just have the beau ouf, beau guenon. But I want the beef cooked well done, no mushrooms, and substitute the pearl onions for a side of steamed broccoli. And bring me a side of ranch." Chloe's expression remained perfectly neutral, an impressive feat of customer service restraint. "Madame, the bœuf bourguignon is braised slowly in red wine for several hours. The chef cannot alter the cooking temperature of the beef at this stage. Furthermore, I might gently suggest that broccoli and ranch would clash with the heavy reduction sauce. Perhaps the roasted chicken would be more to your liking." Beatrice's eyes flashed with indignation. Her face flushed a mottled red. She leaned forward, her voice rising above the ambient hum of the restaurant. "Excuse me? Did I ask for your culinary opinion? I know what I want. You just write it down on your little pad and tell the kitchen to do it." "I apologize, madam," Chloe said smoothly, keeping her hands clasped behind her back. "I only wish to ensure your dining experience was optimal. The chef is notoriously strict about alterations to the signature dishes." Beatrice scoffed loudly, turning her attention to Lorenzo, seeking an ally in her cruelty. "Can you believe the incompetence? This is what happens when you hire people off the street. Just bring me the food." She glared back at Chloe, her upper lip curling into a sneer. "Why am I even arguing with you? You probably can't even read the menu properly without a pronunciation guide." The silence that followed was heavy, thick enough to cut with a steak knife. At nearby tables, a few patrons paused their conversations, their eyes darting toward the commotion. Lorenzo's jaw tightened. He despised lack of decorum, but he was curious to see how the unassuming waitress would handle the humiliation. He expected tears, an apology, or perhaps for her to flee to the kitchen. He did not expect her mask to slip. Chloe stood perfectly still. The subservient slump of her shoulders vanished, replaced by an aristocratic rigidity. Her hazel eyes, previously warm and accommodating, turned flat and cold. When she spoke, the Midwestern twang was entirely gone. "Il est tragique, madame," Chloe began, her voice dropping an octave, slipping into a rapid, flawlessly accented Parisian French. "Que tant d'argent n'achète pas une once de classe. Le menu n'est pas le problème. Le problème est que votre palais est aussi inculte que vos manières." "It is tragic, madame, that so much money buys not an ounce of class. The menu is not the problem. The problem is that your palate is as uncultured as your manners." Beatrice blinked, her mouth opening and closing like a fish deprived of oxygen. "What? What did you just say to me? Speak English?" Chloe ignored her, turning her sharp gaze directly to Lorenzo. "Et vous, monsieur?" she continued, the French rolling off her tongue with terrifying authority. "Si vous devez fréquenter des enfants gâtés pour vos affaires, je vous plains. Je vous apporterai le poulet. And you, sir, if you must associate with spoiled children for your business, I pity you. I will bring the chicken." Without waiting for a dismissal, Chloe executed a crisp, military-perfect pivot and walked toward the kitchen, leaving a stunned silence in her wake. Beatrice gasped, slamming her hand on the table. "Lorenzo, did you hear that? I demand to see the manager. I want that girl fired immediately. What did she even say?" Lorenzo slowly set down his crystal water glass. A slow, dangerous smirk tugged at the corner of his mouth. Unlike Beatrice, Lorenzo's upbringing in the European underworld meant he was perfectly fluent in 5 languages. He had understood every single word. More importantly, he recognized the specific cadence and dialect of the waitress's French. It wasn't the French of an American university student who had studied abroad. It was the clipped, authoritative French of the old money elite, tinged with something darker, something fiercely territorial. "She said," Lorenzo murmured, his eyes tracking Chloe's retreating figure until she disappeared behind the swinging kitchen doors, "that she is bringing you the chicken." "I am not eating here," Beatrice hissed, grabbing her diamond-encrusted clutch. "If you don't have her fired right now, Lorenzo, my father will hear about how you let a waitress insult me." "Your father," Lorenzo said, his voice dropping to a glacial whisper that made Beatrice freeze in her seat, "will sign the zoning permits on Monday morning, or I will ensure his upcoming re-election campaign is entirely unfunded. As for you, Beatrice, I think it's best you take a cab home. Our business has concluded." He signaled his bodyguard standing near the entrance. Within seconds, a terrified and confused Beatrice was escorted out of l'orangerie. Lorenzo remained at the table alone. When the manager came rushing over a few minutes later, sweating profusely and apologizing for the altercation, Lorenzo simply held up a hand. "The waitress?" Lorenzo said, his voice quiet. "Chloe." "I am so sorry, Mr. Falcone," the manager stammered. "She's new. I assure you she will be terminated immediately." "If you fire her," Lorenzo interrupted, his tone leaving absolutely no room for negotiation, "I will buy this building tomorrow and turn it into a parking lot. You will leave her exactly where she is. Now, bring me a glass of your best cognac and the check." As Lorenzo sipped the dark amber liquid, his mind raced. A waitress in Chicago who speaks aristocratic French and has the nerve to verbally execute a politician's daughter without a second thought. Who exactly was Chloe Sinclair? He intended to find out. 72 hours later, the rain was coming down in sheets across the grim, industrial streets of the West Loop. Lorenzo sat in the back of his armored SUV, the rhythmic thumping of the windshield wipers providing the only soundtrack to the heavy silence. In the passenger seat, his right-hand man, Matteo, handed a manila folder over the center console. "You were right, boss," Matteo said, his voice gruff. "She's a ghost. The name Chloe Sinclair didn't exist until 3 years ago. The social security number she used to get the job at the restaurant belongs to a deceased infant from Ohio. Her bank accounts are minimal, purely cash deposits. She rents a small walk-up under a Shell LLC." Lorenzo opened the folder. Inside were blurry surveillance photos of the waitress, a copy of her forged driver's license, and a few sparse utility bills. "No one is a ghost, Matteo. Everyone leaves footprints in the mud. You just have to know which type of shoe they wear." "Did you run her biometric profile through the Interpol contacts?" Matteo shifted uncomfortably. "I did. That's where things get complicated. We got a hit, a restricted one." Lorenzo's eyes snapped up from the paperwork. "Explain." "Her real name isn't Chloe Sinclair. It's Amélie Laurent." The air in the SUV seemed to drop 10 degrees. Lorenzo leaned back against the leather seat, a cold knot forming in his stomach. The Laurent Syndicate. For decades, the Corsican French mob had controlled the illicit weapons and antiquities trade across the Mediterranean. They were notoriously brutal, insular, and traditional. Bastien Laurent, the current patriarch, was a man who solved disputes with car bombs rather than negotiations. Bastien Laurent's daughter, Lorenzo mused, the puzzle pieces rapidly snapping into place. The youngest, the one who supposedly died in a boating accident off the coast of Marseille 3 years ago. "Exactly," Matteo nodded. "Rumor has it she didn't die. Bastien was arranging a marriage between her and an enforcer for the Solntsevskaya Bratva, the Russian Brotherhood, to secure a new shipping route. The week before the wedding, her boat goes up in flames. No body was ever recovered. The Russians took it as an insult. A war broke out, and she vanished. If Bastien finds out she's alive, serving duck confit in Chicago—" "He won't," Lorenzo said softly, closing the file, "because she belongs to my city now." Through the rain-streaked window, Lorenzo spotted her. She was exiting the rear service door of l'Orangerie, wearing a dark trench coat, a cheap umbrella shielding her from the downpour. She moved quickly, her head down, blending into the shadows of the alleyway like a seasoned operative. "Wait here," Lorenzo commanded, unlatching the door. He stepped out into the rain, the cold water soaking into his custom-tailored suit. He walked silently, his heavy footsteps masked by the storm. He cornered her just as she was unlocking the door to her rusted sedan parked beneath a flickering streetlight. "It's a bit far from Marseille, isn't it?" Lorenzo spoke in fluent French, leaning against the brick wall of the alley. Amélie, froze. The umbrella in her hand trembled for a fraction of a second before her training kicked in. She didn't scream. She didn't run. Instead, she slowly turned around. The meek waitress from the restaurant was entirely gone. In the dim yellow light, she looked lethal. Her right hand was slipped casually into the pocket of her trench coat, and Lorenzo had no doubt she was gripping a weapon. "I don't know what you're talking about, Mr. Falcone," she replied in English, her voice steady. "My shift is over. If you have a complaint about the service, take it up with management." "I did," Lorenzo chuckled, taking a slow step forward. The manager was quite terrified, but not nearly as terrified as he would be if he knew he had the heir to the Corsican Union bussing his tables. Amélie's jaw clenched. The streetlights caught the sharp angles of her face. "If you know who I am, then you know you should walk away. I have nothing to do with my father's business. I am dead to them." "You are hiding," Lorenzo corrected, his voice dropping into a smooth, persuasive timbre. "And you are doing a terrible job of it. You lost your temper at my table. You let your pride override your survival instincts. That little display of Parisian arrogance? It was beautiful, Amélie, but it was reckless. If my men could find you in 3 days, Bastion's hounds will find you in 3 weeks." Amélie pulled her hand from her pocket. The metallic click of a switchblade snapping open echoed in the rain. She leveled the 6-inch blade at Lorenzo's chest, her eyes blazing with a feral intensity. "If you are planning to sell me back to him to gain favor in the ports, you'll have to drag a corpse onto the plane." Lorenzo didn't flinch. He didn't even look at the knife. He looked directly into her eyes, captivated by the sheer, unadulterated fire in them. He was a man surrounded by sycophants and soldiers who followed his every order. He had never met a woman who looked at him like he was prey. "I have no interest in doing business with your father. His methods are archaic, and his honor is non-existent," Lorenzo said, taking another step forward until the tip of her blade rested dangerously against his silk tie. "I am interested in you." Amélie scoffed, though she didn't retreat. "What do you want? A translator?" "I want leverage," Lorenzo replied honestly. "In 2 weeks, a delegation from the Parisian underworld is coming to Chicago. They want to cut me out of the Great Lakes shipping routes. They think because I am American, I am blind to their politics. They don't know I have the prodigal daughter of their biggest rival sitting in my backyard. You want to use me as a pawn," she spat. "I want to offer you a partnership," Lorenzo countered, his gaze burning into hers. "You understand their codes, their strategies, their weaknesses. You helped me outmaneuver them, and in return, the Falcone Syndicate will provide you with absolute protection. A new identity that Interpol couldn't crack. Real money, real freedom. You will never have to pour another glass of wine for an ungrateful socialite again." The rain pounded against the pavement. Amélie stared at the Mafia boss, her mind calculating the variables. She knew he was a predator. She knew the Falcone name was written in blood across the Midwest. But she also knew she was running out of time. The slip-up at the restaurant had been a fatal error. She could feel the walls closing in. Slowly, she lowered the blade. The metallic click of the knife retracting sounded like a starting gun. "Protection is a strong word, Lorenzo," Amélie murmured, switching back to French, testing the boundaries of their new, dangerous dynamic. "If my father finds me, it will start a war." Lorenzo smiled, a genuine, terrifying expression that promised violence and victory. He reached out, his warm, calloused hand gently pushing a damp strand of hair behind her ear. She shivered, but didn't pull away. "Let him come," Lorenzo whispered in the dark alley. "I've been looking for a reason to burn the Corsican fleet to the ground. Shall we go discuss the terms of your employment, Miss Laurent?" Inside the opulent penthouse of the St. Regis Chicago, the atmosphere was suffocatingly tense. High above the sprawling grid of the city, floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of Lake Michigan, though none of the men gathered around the massive mahogany conference table were looking at the water. Lorenzo Falcone sat at the head of the table, his posture relaxed, his dark eyes observing the players on the board. He wore a bespoke Tom Ford suit, projecting an aura of untouchable authority. Lucien Valère, the impeccably styled emissary of the Parisian Syndicate, leaned back in his leather chair. Flanked by 2 heavy-set bodyguards and his second-in-command, Gaspard, Lucien possessed the smug confidence of a man who believed he held all the winning cards. The French delegation had arrived in Chicago, demanding a 50% stake in the Great Lakes shipping routes that funneled unrecorded Patek Philippe timepieces, uncut diamonds from West Africa, and undocumented impressionist art through the American Midwest. Standing discreetly in the corner of the room, blending into the shadows cast by a towering indoor palm, was Amélie. Gone was the subservient posture and the cheap waitress uniform. Tonight, she was draped in a tailored black Saint Laurent pantsuit, her hair falling in soft, loose waves around her shoulders. To the French delegation, she was merely eye candy, a silent assistant placed there to pour espresso and look pretty. They did not grant her a second glance. Murmuring quietly to Gaspard, Lucien believed he was wrapped in a cloak of linguistic invulnerability. "L'Américain est un idiot," Lucien whispered in a rapid, colloquial Parisian slang, a smirk playing on his lips. "Il pense qu'il a le contrôle, mais nous allons l'épuiser. Offrez-lui 20%. S'il refuse, nous bloquons ses cargaisons à Marseille jusqu'à ce qu'il saigne à blanc. The American is an idiot. He thinks he has control, but we will wear him down. Offer him 20%. If he refuses, we block his shipments in Marseille until he bleeds dry." Lorenzo maintained his stoic facade, tapping a solid gold Cartier pen rhythmically against the glass surface of the table. He understood every word, of course, but the trap he had laid with Amélie required patience. He waited for Lucien to formally present the insulting offer in heavily accented English, feigning ignorance of their private plotting. "Mr. Falcone," Lucien began, spreading his hands in a gesture of fake diplomacy. "We have evaluated your infrastructure. While impressive for a local operation, you lack the European reach. We are prepared to offer you a 20% retention of your current routes in exchange for our extensive distribution network. It is a generous proposal." Stepping out from the shadows, the rhythmic click of Amélie's Christian Louboutin heels drew every eye in the room. She walked with the predatory grace of a panther closing in on its prey, circling behind Lorenzo's chair before coming to a stop at his right side. The air in the room suddenly felt dangerously thin. "Ce n'est pas généreux, Lucien," Amélie stated in flawless, aristocratic French, her voice ringing out like a crystal bell in the quiet room. "C'est un suicide financier. Et je me demande depuis quand la famille Vallier est devenue assez stupide pour menacer le cartel Falcone avec des ports qu'il ne contrôle même pas. It is not generous, Lucien. It is financial suicide. And I wonder since when the Vallier family became stupid enough to threaten the Falcone cartel with ports they don't even control." Lucien's face drained of all color. The smug smile vanished, replaced by an expression of absolute horror. He stared at the woman he had dismissed as a mere servant, his brain struggling to process the impossible reality standing before him. Gaspard, the second in command, physically recoiled, knocking his espresso cup onto the mahogany table. The dark liquid spilled across the legal documents, staining the white paper. Gaspard knew that voice. He knew the sharp, unyielding glare of the Laurent family's youngest daughter. "Amélie!" Gaspard gasped, his voice trembling, the name slipping out before he could stop it. "But the boat! You burned in the bay." "You seem surprised, Gaspard," Amélie continued, her tone dropping to a lethal whisper. She placed her hands on the table and leaned forward, locking eyes with the man who had orchestrated her demise. "Did you really think I wouldn't check the engine manifold before taking my yacht out? Did you really believe you could take Russian money to rig my boat, frame the Solntsevskaya Bratva for my murder, and walk away clean?" Panic erupted among the French delegation. Lucien shot a terrified look at Gaspard, realizing instantly that his right-hand man had been playing a double game that had ignited a massive mob war in Marseille 3 years ago. I don't know what she's talking about," Gaspard stammered, sweating profusely, his hand inching toward the inside of his suit jacket. "It's a lie! She's a ghost!" Lorenzo did not even blink. With a subtle flick of his wrist, Matteo and 4 heavily armed Falcone enforcers stepped out from the adjoining suite, their suppressed weapons raised and locked onto the French delegates. The sound of safeties clicking off echoed like thunderclaps in the silent penthouse. "Keep your hands exactly where they are, Gaspar," Lorenzo commanded softly in English, his dark eyes gleaming with a dangerous, triumphant light. "Or my men will ensure you actually become a ghost." Chaos threatened to consume the penthouse, but the overwhelming firepower of the Falcone syndicate kept the French delegation pinned to their luxury leather chairs. Gaspar sat trembling, realizing his betrayal had not only been exposed to the one woman he failed to kill, but also to his current boss. Lucien Valliere looked as though he might be sick, the grand illusion of his Parisian empire crumbling before his very eyes. Realizing the trap had snapped shut entirely, Lucien frantically tried to salvage his own life. "Monsieur Falcone," he pleaded, his voice cracking, switching to English in a desperate bid for mercy. "I swear to you, I knew nothing of Gaspard's treason against the Laurent family. We can negotiate. We can offer you 60%. 70. "There are no negotiations anymore," Lorenzo interrupted, smoothly, switching effortlessly to French to shatter the emissary's remaining pride. "Vous êtes venu dans ma ville pour me voler. Vous avez insulté mon intelligence. Et pire encore, vous avez amené un traître devant la femme que je compte épouser. You came into my city to steal from me. You insulted my intelligence. And worse, you brought a traitor before the woman I intend to marry." Amelie's breath caught in her throat. She glanced sharply down at Lorenzo. Marriage? It had not been part of their strategic discussions over the last 2 weeks. They had forged an alliance, spent late nights decoding encrypted ledgers, and shared tense, whiskey-soaked evenings mapping out this very ambush. The undeniable electric chemistry between them had simmered constantly beneath the surface, a dangerous tango of mutual respect and attraction. But Lorenzo had never mentioned making her his wife. Defeated and entirely outmaneuvered, Lucien had no choice. Under the watchful barrels of Matteo's men, he signed over the exclusive rights to the Marseille and Nice shipping lanes directly to the Falcone syndicate, effectively handing Lorenzo the keys to the Mediterranean. As a final act of submission, Lucien was forced to leave Gaspar behind, bound and gagged, to be shipped back to Bastien Laurent in a wooden crate, a gruesome olive branch from Chicago to Marseille that would secure peace and confirm Amélie's survival on her own terms. Silence returned to the penthouse once the French delegation was escorted out. The heavy mahogany doors clicked shut, leaving Lorenzo and Amélie alone in the expansive suite. The city lights of Chicago began to flicker on below them, painting the skyline in twilight hues. Pouring 2 glasses of Macallan 25, Lorenzo walked over to the window and handed one to Amélie. His fingers brushed against hers, sending a jolt of electricity up her arm. She accepted the crystal tumbler, her hazel eyes searching his face for any sign of deception. "A marriage proposal?" Amélie asked softly, sipping the smoky scotch. "That was quite the theatrical addition to the plan, Mr. Falcone. Are you trying to secure my father's empire, or just my loyalty?" "Neither," Lorenzo replied, stepping into her personal space. He reached out, his thumb gently tracing the line of her jaw. The ruthless Mafia boss was gone, replaced by a man looking at an equal. "I don't need your father's empire. I have my own. And as for your loyalty, Amélie, I know it cannot be bought or manipulated. I said it because it is the only logical conclusion to this partnership. You are a queen without a throne, and I am tired of ruling this city alone." Time passed, shifting the balance of power across the global underworld. The Falcone syndicate grew untouchable, their grip on international trade absolute. But the most significant change occurred right in the heart of Chicago's River North district. Soft jazz floated through the newly renovated dining room of l'Orangerie. The restaurant, now wholly owned by an anonymous LLC managed by Lorenzo, was more exclusive than ever. The crystal chandeliers gleamed, and the elite still gathered, unaware of the blood and strategy that financed the very ground they walked upon. Sitting together at the center booth, effectively holding court, were Lorenzo and Amélie Falcone. Amélie wore a stunning diamond necklace that caught the light, a far cry from the brass name tag she had worn months prior. She laughed at something Lorenzo whispered in her ear, her radiant smile a testament to a woman who had reclaimed her life from the ashes. When a new, nervous waitress approached their table, trembling slightly as she handed them the leather-bound menus, Amélie didn't sneer. She smiled warmly, thanking the girl in gentle, Midwestern English, before ordering the bœuf bourguignon, perfectly braised, just the way the chef intended. Did this thrilling tale of power, revenge, and mafia romance leave you wanting more? If you loved watching Amélie silence her enemies and claim her rightful throne alongside Lorenzo, hit that like button. Share this story with your friends who crave high-stakes drama, and don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more intense, real-life inspired stories of love and underworld empires. We post new videos every single week.